Today, I'm going to show you how you can create, debug, and deploy your AWS Lambda applications without leaving VS Code. But before we can do all of that, we need to meet some prerequisites. First of all, you obviously need to have an AWS account. And if you currently don't have one, then go and get one. I've made a video a couple weeks ago about how to create one, which you can follow just step by step and go through that. The next thing we want is to create an IAM user account. So AWS recommends IAM Identity Center, but that's mostly for organizations. If you're just playing around and learning how to do things, then the not recommended version is easier. So first of all, we're going to go to aws.amazon.com and then we're gonna sign in. So next thing you want to do is search for IAM if it doesn't show up on your home screen, and then you can click on users. And I've actually made one earlier just to test that it works. So I'm going to delete that and then show you how to create it again. Okay, so we click create user button, and then we can just say AWS Lambda VSCode demo. And we don't need to provide this user access to the management console because it will only be used in our command line. We just click next, and then we can attach policies directly. And what we're after is this administrator access policy. And we click next. You can add a new tag if you want to track it later. And then we click create user. And voila, we're done with creating the user. But what we will need in just a minute is the security credentials. We will need the access keys. So again, you go from the users page, you click on the user you just created, then you click on security credentials, and then you click create access key. And here we're just gonna say command line interface, say that you understand that there are other recommendations, and click next. And then you can give it a description if you want, and then click create access key. And make sure you never share your secret access key. You'll never commit it to Git or share it with anybody else. And if you do, you will just need to delete this access key and create a new one. Anyways, we're going to leave this page in just a second to see what we need to do next. So actually, we just followed this step 3. I didn't even realize it. Okay, so the next option is to install the AWS CLI. And AWS CLI basically just allows you to run AWS commands from your command line or from the terminal. So we can just open this in a new tab, and then we can choose which operating system we're on. I'm on a Mac, and now we can just download this package file. We're gonna open it, and the instructions would be similar for Windows. And if you're using Linux, then you can figure it out. So we just click continue on everything, click install, type in your administrator password for the Mac or for the Windows, whatever you're prompted or whatever operating system you're using, and it should be relatively quick. Okay, so now we click close, move it to trash, full. So we're done installing the CLI, but if we want to confirm that it actually works, we can open the terminal and say AWS help. As long as you see something other than command not found, then you successfully installed it. So now we need to configure the AWS credentials in our terminal using the AWS CLI. And that's where we will use those access keys that we created earlier. So back to the terminal, we just say AWS configure, and my access key ID is gonna be different because I created a new user, and then my secret access key will be this one. Please close your eyes. And then the default region name, we're gonna keep it as US West 2, but feel free to choose any other region that's more relevant to you. And then the output format, we can just pick JSON, even though I have no idea what that means. Okay, and we're done with this part. So now we can just click done here. We can just continue without viewing or downloading. And again, we can just always create this key later. Okay, and now we're done. Now, the next thing we need is the actual SAM CLI. And SAM stands for Serverless Application Model. So we already did all of these things. So now we can just go to installing the AWS SAM CLI portion of this page. Again, click on Mac. Because it's easier, we're just gonna install using GUI and follow the same process. Obviously, we're gonna agree with the license because otherwise we can't use it. And then we just install it, enter our administrator password, and just wait a couple more seconds. Okay, the installation was successful, and move this to trash. We should be able to just type SAM version and it should show us stuff. So if you see anything other than command not found, then SAM was installed. Now, last thing you need before we do anything is Docker, because under the hood, the way SAM allows you to debug your Lambda applications in VSCode is by using Docker containers. So I already have it installed and running, but make sure you do too. So to do that, you can just type Docker, and then you can just get Docker and follow the instructions on this page. That should be pretty straightforward. And now that we're done with all the prerequisites that are outside VS Code, we can finally go and open VS Code and see what we need to do in there. First thing you want is to install the AWS Toolkit extension. So you will click on this extensions button, and then you will search for AWS Toolkit, and then you click install. So now we've met all the prerequisites. So now if we press Command-Shift-P all at the same time, we should see a bunch of different options. If you don't see AWS showing up right away, you can just type AWS. And now the option that we're after is Create Lambda SAM application. So press that, and now we're presented with a bunch of different runtimes. You can see that each runtime is also duplicated with the image in parentheses after it. What that means is that you can choose to deploy your application in a container. For example, if you want to bypass the Lambda limits of how much code you can upload, which is up to 50 megabytes if it's zipped, 250 megabytes unzipped, and if you choose the containers, then it's up to 10 gigabytes. We're not going to get anywhere close to 10 gigabytes, and we want things to be fast, so we're just going to choose Python 3.11 regular, and then we're presented with the option to select a SAM application template. The first option will create a basic Lambda app which will have HTTP requests as its triggers. The second option, as you can see, just invokes a Lambda for every EC2 instance state change in your account. It's not that interesting. What we're interested in is the ability to choose from a bunch of different options. So we can use EventBridge events to create our Lambda using those triggers. So we just click on this, and then obviously we need to select origin, and then select the registry, which is the only one here. And then we can select a schema. And schema is basically all the triggers you can have in the EventBridge. And there are just a bunch of them. But as an example, let's just say that we want our Lambda to run when an S3 object is created. So we will just type S3 to filter down our options to just S3 related ones. And then we choose AWS S3 at object created. Now we need to select a folder on our computer where this is going to be stored. And I'm going to put it in development and then say Lambda VSCode demo, but you can name it whatever you want. And then we click open. And now we need to give a name to our new application. And I've actually had some issues doing this before. So let's try this. And if it doesn't work, I'll show you how you can fix that. Well, at least the workaround. So we're going to try to give it the same name and press enter to confirm. And it looks like things aren't happening. Okay, but they are happening. It says it downloaded code for schema, but then we got this error resuming SAM application creation. And then it suggests that we can view the AWS Toolkit logs, which we can do by pressing Command-Shift-P and then AWS View Toolkit logs. But as you can see, they're not very helpful because it just says type error, $sign is not iterable. Okay, so I told you I'll show you how to fix this. So basically, we'll just create the SAM application again, and then we'll go through all the steps again. So from scratch, and then schema is object created. We can use the same folder, and now we can just say Lambda VSCode demo 1. And as long as you got this preview readme toolkit MD, then it has successfully been created. But now the problem is we got two of these folders. So we can actually get rid of the original one we tried to create. And okay, so feel free to read this README toolkit that has a bunch of useful information if you're needing to find something and you don't know how to do. But our Lambda application has been created on our computer. It hasn't been deployed anywhere. It only exists right here. And here is what we get. We get an example event, which is not really the event that you will get when you upload a new object to your S3 bucket. I'll show you the real event you will get in just a second. Then this hello world function has a couple of folders. Hello world is where our app handler is, called Lambda handler. And here, as we can see, it's not really Python. So we can just change this and just say print event and then return event. One other thing you need to be familiar with is this template YAML file. And this describes how your resources will be created once they're deployed to your AWS account. So as you can see, we got this serverless function, which is a Lambda function. We got the code URI, which is basically the name of our application right here. Then we got the handler, which is the path to where our handler is, which is where I showed you, hello world app.py, and then Lambda handler method. So we can always change it here. And then here we have this event section, which is where our trigger is defined. As we can see, we got this CloudWatch event with the S3 object created as details. And then this part is not really that important to us. And now let me show you how we can actually debug it. First of all, let me tell you that if you run it from here, it's not going to work because it has no idea what these things are. But even if you remove them, it basically does nothing. And that's because there is nothing in this file that tells Python, hey, you need to run this. So we actually are after this run and debug section on the sidebar. And as you can see, we had a debug configuration already created for us. So let's just take a look at it. So here we see that it has the name of our function, that it's going to use the template as an entry point. And then obviously it has the template path. And then we got this payload, which is currently empty. So if you try to debug it right now, we should hit this breakpoint. It's probably going to take a little longer in the first run. So if we look at this event, it's empty. And why is it empty? Because in this debug configuration that we just looked at, our payload is empty. So you can either set it to JSON directly, or we can just give it the path to our event. And we will already provide it with an event example. So we can just right click on it and copy path and then save it. And then we can just run it again. Again, it's going to take a few seconds. And now if we hover over event, we will see all the information that we got from that event. So we got object created, source, resources. But again, it's not really the event that you will expect to see when your S3 object is uploaded. So let me show you what it would actually look like. You will get something like this. Some of these entries are incorrect because they're from the previous run whenever I did this before the recording. But this is what the event that you will get will look like. So what you're probably going to be interested in is this S3 portion, where it will tell you which bucket the object was uploaded to, and then the object key, size, and then you can always use these details to download it or store the information about this event, for example, in DynamoDB. So again, one last time, we're just gonna run it and see. Now that we changed the event, we're going to see it differently in our debugger. And as you can see, we got records, event version. So we're after S3 portion here, object. Okay, so we got that. So that is how you can debug your Lambda application without having to deploy it and wait for things. You can just have a fake event or even a real event. But as I mentioned before, this Lambda application only exists on your computer right now. So how do we deploy this? Well, there are a couple of ways. The first way is to press Command-Shift-P again and search for AWS Sync SAM application. But the problem with that is it's going to do it without performing a CloudFormation deployment, and that will cause drift in your CloudFormation stack. If you don't know what CloudFormation is, it basically tracks your resources from usually a configuration file like this YAML template that we looked at. And so if your resources get out of sync, that means that there was a drift between what's in the template and your actual resources in AWS account. And that's usually not good. So we don't want to do this part. So we just can click cancel. What we want to do is open this terminal and then say sam deploy. And as you can see, it's going to tell us that we have missing options, either stack name or guided. So the first time you do that, you can just choose guided and it will guide you through how you can deploy it. And it says that your template file is not found at this location. And that's because we need to actually go one level deeper to where our application is located. And so we cd into that and then repeat. So this time it's gonna present us with a few options. Here we can just leave the stack name as suggested, region again as suggested, and then it asks us if we want to have the changes confirmed before they're deployed. That's probably a good idea. And then Sam asks you if you are giving him permission to create the IAM roles if needed, and you say yes. And then do you want to preserve the state of previously provisioned resources when an operation fails? And we probably don't want to do that, because if something fails, we don't want to have our system in a state where we have like half the resources created and half not, because then if we try to deploy again, there may be conflicts. So we can just say we don't want to disable rollback, and then we'll just save these arguments to configuration file. And then by default, we can just choose samconfig.toml, and we can just leave the default configuration environment. And now it says that change set was created successfully. And do we want to deploy this change set? As you can see, we're going to have these resources added. They look okay to me. So we just type Y for yes and press enter. And usually it's pretty quick, maybe up to a minute. As long as some update shows up every few seconds, then you should be good. Just need to be patient. And we got the role creation complete. Now it's creating the actual function. Okay, the function complete. And now we're creating the rule. And the rule is basically going to be a trigger for our function. And looks like we got everything successfully created. So now we have two options. We can either go straight to AWS account in the browser and confirm that these were created, but I promised you that we don't even need to do that. We can just go to this AWS section in the sidebar, and here you will see your regions, your configured regions. You can click refresh. And so if you go to the region where you have those resources created, you can click here on Lambda and see that, yep, our Lambda VSCode demo 1 was created. And then it looks like that this 3 bucket, which would trigger our AWS Lambda function, was actually not created, because this bucket is just for the resources that Sam manages. But now we can actually go to AWS account and confirm that. So if we go to S3, we will see that we have only 1 bucket. And then if we go to properties, we see no events, nothing set up. So it's definitely not the bucket that we need. Then we go to Lambda to see if there are any triggers on it. So we go to configuration and then triggers. And looks like that trigger is for any S3 bucket in our account. Whenever any object gets created in our S3 bucket or any of these 3 buckets, then this event will trigger our Lambda function. Obviously, you probably want to have a specific bucket set up. I will show you how to do that in just a second, but we can test our function once it's deployed to see that it's doing the right thing. Let's just see. Okay, so it looks like we didn't have any recent invocations. So let's try to upload something to the only S3 bucket that exists. So just click here, then we get something from, well, let's just say we upload this DALI image, click upload. Okay, and now we can go back to Lambda and wait for the logs to show up. It's probably gonna take a few minutes before they show up, so I'll be right back. Okay, it's been well over 5 minutes and there's still nothing that shows up in CloudWatch metrics. Not quite sure why, but let me show you a better way to do this. So we go back to Visual Studio and now we go to this template YAML, and here we're going to replace this section from events with this. So we're gonna say that we want to rely on S3 events. Our bucket is hello world bucket reference. You can either use the reference here and then create S3 bucket later in the template, or you can just use the bucket name if you already have one created. And then we're gonna say that all the S3 object created events from this bucket that we want to get triggered on. So we save this, and now let's try to redeploy this. So we should be able to just say sam deploy this time, because it should have saved our configuration from earlier. And now it's telling us that it's gonna change a few things. It's gonna delete this previous rule and add a new bucket. And now we're gonna deploy this change set. And again, it's gonna take a few more seconds for it to fully finish. And eventually we will see that it successfully created /updated stack, our stack name in our region. So now we can go back to this AWS tab, refresh it, and now we see that the new bucket was created and there are no objects in it right now. So now we can right-click on it, click upload files, and now we can just say upload the same image, okay? And then it uploaded. And so we can see in our AWS account, first of all, while we were waiting for the logs in CloudWatch to show up, let me show you what may have changed with this function. So let's see. If we go to configuration, triggers, we see that there are no more triggers. Well, how is our Lambda function going to get executed if there is no trigger? Well, let's go to the S3 bucket. So we need to refresh it. Then we go to the newly created bucket. Then we click properties, and we see that we got these event notifications set up on the bucket itself rather than the function. And then it tells us that our function is the destination for this event. So now, if we go to monitor, let's click view CloudWatch logs, and actually we can see that our Lambda function was actually triggered. It printed the event, and that's our file name, and it looks like it worked. Now, whenever you're done with all of these experiments, we may want to delete all of the resources so you don't accidentally get charged for them. So you can do that all from here. You can start with CloudFormation and just say delete CloudFormation stack. And for some reason, if you refresh this, it for some reason doesn't delete all the other resources. So we can just go to S3, delete that, and I'm not going to type that. I'm just gonna copy name and then try to delete it again. Okay, that was deleted. And now finally, we're gonna delete our Lambda, delete, and obviously you may also want to delete all of this SAM stuff because we're not gonna use it if we're no longer figuring this out. And again, we're just gonna copy name, delete, and it says fail to delete. I wonder why. Let's try again. Okay, well, I guess some things you just can't delete. And then for some reason, it won't let us delete IAM roles from here. So if you want to fully clean it up, then you go to IAM and then roles, and then you look for this Lambda VSCode demo. Looks like I got one left over from previously. Type delete, and you should be done. And that is how you create, debug, and deploy your AWS Lambda applications from within VSCode. And if you want to learn more about IAM and what all of these different roles and policies mean, then watch the next video.